All right, let's get right into it. Today we're going to break down a pretty wild story that kicked off with a startling intelligence report. We'll unpack the accusation that Russia was actually helping Iran target U.S. forces, and then explore how the Trump administration's words and actions seem to create this really confusing picture of what their priorities were.
And it all really starts right here, with this bombshell of a headline from the Washington Post. Russia providing Iran with intel to target American forces. I mean, think about that. That single claim completely changes the game, suggesting a major U.S. adversary is now playing a role, even if indirectly. This is the thread we're going to pull on.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll dig into that alarming accusation itself. Then we'll look at how questions about it were basically sidestepped. After that, we'll examine a policy on sanctions that seems to go in the complete opposite direction. We'll also explore where the administration's focus really was. And finally, we'll unpack what they actually meant by unconditional surrender. Okay, first up, that alarming accusation. Let's really get into the weeds of what this intelligence report actually said that got everybody talking.
So the details here are pretty specific and, frankly, pretty concerning. What the source tells us is that Russia was allegedly passing targeting data to Iran. And we're not talking about vague info. We're talking about the locations of U.S. warships and aircraft. This all came from 3 different officials, and when the Kremlin was asked about it, they just declined to comment.
So, you've got this bombshell report out in the open. The immediate question is, how did the administration respond? Let's turn to the official public reaction, because the source material highlights some very interesting interactions.
And the first real public test comes from this question. A reporter just cuts right to the heart of it, basically laying it out there for the president. So, are the Russians helping Iran attack Americans?
And here's the response, according to the source. Instead of addressing the intelligence, the president is shown deflecting, calling it a stupid question, and basically scolding the reporter for even bringing it up.
And that wasn't a one-off. The source then points to a spokesperson who essentially says, whether this report is true or not doesn't really matter. The focus, she implies, was squarely on the military campaign against Iran, period.
Okay, so while the administration was publicly pushing back on questions about Russia, what was happening behind the scenes on a policy level? This is where the source material points to a fascinating contradiction, and it all has to do with sanctions.
I mean, just look at this. It's a pretty stark contrast, right? On one side, you have this very serious security allegation. Russia is helping an adversary target U.S. troops. And on the other, you have a reported economic policy decision to ease sanctions on Russian oil.
And this isn't just speculation. The source includes this direct quote from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, which makes the policy crystal clear. He flat out confirms they gave permission for India to buy Russian oil and even hints that they might unsanction more of it down the line.
So this all brings up a massive question of focus. If the administration wasn't all that concerned about the intelligence on Russia, what was the top priority? The source material really paints a picture of, some very different priorities at play.
According to the Treasury Secretary, the administration's military priority that day was unmistakable, launching the biggest bombing campaign against Iran to try and wipe out their missile capabilities.
But, and this is a big but, the source points out a huge disconnect. That press conference where the president was getting all those questions, it wasn't about the war. The official topic of the day was his plan to prevent college athletes from being paid.
And it wasn't just the Russia question that got brushed off. The source notes that other pretty significant topics, like a major cabinet change, were also shut down. The goal, it seemed, was to keep a laser focus on that one very specific, non-military issue.
So, let's talk about the end game. What did victory in this whole thing even look like? The source material takes a close look at how the administration defined its main goal, which was getting Iran to an unconditional surrender.
And this is really the crucial point. The definition here frames unconditional surrender not as something Iran does, but as a decision the president makes. It's the moment he personally determines that Iran is no longer a threat, and it doesn't matter if Iran agrees or says a single word about it.
So after laying out the intelligence, the deflections, the policy moves, and the definitions, we're left with this fundamental question. When a leader's words and their actions seem to be pointing in completely different directions, how do you figure out what their true priorities actually are? This explainer has put all the pieces from the source on the table. What you make of it is the real